My name is Thomas Brown. I'm 31, an entrepreneur here in Denver, Colorado. And let me tell you something few understand about powerful families. Sometimes a man's greatest enemy isn't outside, but sitting at the dinner table every Sunday. My family owned one of the largest luxury car dealership networks in the state, an empire built over 3 generations of Browns. On the surface, everything looked perfect. I was a Brown, carried a name that opened doors, and was supposedly part of the family business. You know those Sunday family meetings everyone thinks are about unity and love? Well, for me, they were practical lessons on how to be invisible in a room full of people. My father, Robert Brown, had an impressive knack for looking the other way whenever I started talking about my business ideas, while my mother, Margaret, changed the topic with the finesse of someone who'd practiced this dance 1,000 times. The sporting goods store that closed in 6 months, the startup consultancy that never took off, the delivery app that nobody even bothered to download, each failure quietly confirmed what they'd already decided about me. I swallowed hard, smiled politely, and kept trying to prove my worth. But each failed effort only reinforced their narrative. It was as if I was tolerated by the family, but never truly accepted. What bothered me most was how they'd discuss the future of the company right in front of me, as if I were a ghost at the table. My brother Kevin always had a new expansion strategy to present, with colorful charts and projections that made my father beam with approval. Approval I'd never been able to spark. My sister Patricia brought detailed sales reports and impressive numbers, showing how she was revolutionizing the company's marketing department. My life's routine was a perfect mask of normality, but signs of exclusion became more obvious each passing week. I spent hours in my office crafting detailed business plans that no one in the family showed any interest in reading, developing innovative ideas that were politely ignored in family discussions. It was a strange, painful situation. I had the Brown name, but not the respect it came with. The nights were always the hardest. The mask of normality finally slipped, and I was left alone with my thoughts in the silence of my Denver apartment. I found myself counting how many times I'd been ignored that week, how many of my ideas had been dismissed without consideration. The downtown Denver apartment became a silent prison where I relived every small humiliation and every look of disdain disguised as concern. There were times, especially in the early hours when sleep wouldn't come, when I wondered if I was being overly paranoid, exaggerating the family situation. But then Monday morning would arrive, and I'd see Kevin walk into the main office with his imported Italian leather briefcase, greeting staff by name as if he owned the place. Patricia got the same treatment, the same reverence, the same respectful attention I had only ever wished for once in my life. Worst of all was the constant feeling that I was wasting the best years of my life waiting for an opportunity that might never come from within this family structure. I was 31, and still emotionally dependent on approval from a family that seemed to have given up on me long ago, maybe since I was a kid. It felt like the universe was preparing something special, something that would test everything I believed about myself, and I just needed to be ready when that opportunity finally knocked. It was on a random Thursday in March when I got a call that would change everything. Eddie, a guy I hadn't seen in years, talking with that over-the-top excitement of someone trying to sell you something. He mentioned a unique opportunity that had come up, an abandoned gas station in the Colorado desert being sold for just $20,000. According to Eddie, the area was about to get a new state highway, and whoever bought that land first could make millions when development hit. The offer sounded too risky to be true, but there was something in Eddie's voice that made me listen. Maybe it was the desperation of finally finding something I could call my own. He told me Mountain View Station had been abandoned for 5 years, but its location was strategic and I needed to decide fast because other investors were already interested. When I asked why he was offering the deal to me instead of buying it himself, Eddie laughed nervously and said he didn't have the capital, but he'd earn a commission for introducing me. That same night, I called my family hoping for advice or even financial support. The reaction was exactly what I expected. My father laughed loudly and said I was about to throw money away in another crazy scheme. Kevin said I'd never learn the difference between a real opportunity and a scam, and Patricia sighed, mumbling that I needed professional help with financial decisions. But you know what happens when you're underestimated for years by the people who should believe in you? You develop a stubbornness that can either destroy you or save you. Against everyone's advice, against all logical sense, and even against my own inner voice screaming that it was madness, I decided to bet everything on that abandoned station. I transferred the $20,000 from my savings account to Eddie, signed the papers he brought, and officially became the owner of a piece of land in the middle of nowhere. The betrayal came cold and calculated, just like these things always do in real life. 2 weeks after the purchase, when I tried calling Eddie to discuss next steps, I found out his number was gone. When I went to the address he'd given me, I found an empty office with a "for rent" sign on the door. Eddie had vanished with his commission, leaving me with a property in much worse condition than he described. When my family heard what had happened, their reaction was a mixture of "I told you so" and thinly veiled disgust that hurt more than losing the money. My father shook his head in that disappointed way I'd known so well. My mother sighed like she was dealing with a problem child, and my siblings exchanged looks that clearly said, "Here goes Thomas again." No one offered help. No one asked if I was okay. No one even considered that I might turn this situation into something positive. But here's the thing about being scammed. You can choose to stay a permanent victim or use that experience as fuel for something bigger. Instead of going home to Denver with my head down admitting defeat, I decided to drive out to that abandoned station and see for myself what I'd actually bought. The 3-hour road trip gave me enough time to process the anger, the shame, and the determination battling inside me. When I finally arrived at Mountain View Station and saw the dilapidated structure surrounded by the arid Colorado landscape, with rusted pumps and broken windows, I could have cried, yelled, or just turned around and left. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I took the keys out of the car, walked up to the front door of that forsaken place, and muttered to myself, "Well, Thomas, now's your chance to prove they're wrong about you." What I didn't know then was that this forgotten place held secrets that would transform not just my life, but the entire narrative my family had built about who I was. The first few days after discovering Eddie had scammed me were an emotional roller coaster I had to learn to control. Instead of returning to Denver with my tail between my legs, just as my family probably expected, I decided to take a different approach. I grabbed some basic tools, bought cleaning supplies, and spent an entire week at that abandoned station working in silence. During the day, I cleaned broken windows, swept debris, and tried to understand exactly what I'd bought for my $20,000. At night, I made mental lists of everything that needed fixing and estimated the cost of each repair. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone at that moment, just determined not to let Eddie's betrayal turn me into another victim who quits at the first sign of trouble. There was something therapeutic about the solitude of that place. Away from my family's judgmental eyes, away from constant expectations and disappointment, I could think clearly about what I really wanted from life. Maybe that abandoned gas station was exactly the kind of project I needed, somewhere I could fail without disappointing anyone but myself. By the 3rd week, after getting partial electricity running, I began to see small progress that gave me an energy I hadn't felt in years. Every light that worked again, every pipe I fixed, every square foot of cleared floor was a small victory no one could take from me. I was learning practical skills I'd never needed before: how to rewire electricity, patch leaks, calculate building materials. What impressed me most was how my mind worked differently in that setting. Without the constant pressure to impress my family or compete with my siblings, I could focus fully on the problem in front of me. I developed a simple yet satisfying routine: wake with the sun, work until noon, have a simple lunch, work a few more hours, then spend nights planning the next day. One evening, while planning how to fix the bathroom plumbing, I noticed something odd in the building's structure. Some walls seemed thicker than they should be, and spaces felt off when comparing interior and exterior dimensions. At first, I thought it was just poor construction or old modifications. It was during an attempt to fix a persistent leak in the bathroom floor that I began to realize there was more to this place than met the eye. The floor sounded hollow in certain spots, like there was empty space beneath, and when I tapped with a hammer, some areas sounded completely different. My limited construction experience told me this wasn't normal, but I still didn't know what I was uncovering. In the 6th week of work, when I finally removed some rotted floorboards to investigate the source of a stubborn leak, I discovered something that would change the direction of my story entirely. Beneath those old boards was an opening leading to an underground space I never imagined existed. With a flashlight in hand, and my heart racing faster than it should, I prepared to descend and uncover exactly what that abandoned gas station had been hiding all this time. When I finally descended through that opening in the floor with my flashlight in hand, I expected to find maybe some old pipes, abandoned tools, or at most a forgotten wine cellar. What I found completely changed my understanding of that station, and how destiny sometimes works in mysterious ways. Beneath that abandoned gas station was a perfectly preserved cellar, naturally temperature-controlled by the earth, housing hundreds of wine bottles arranged on wooden shelves that looked like they were built by someone who really knew their craft. The first thing that caught my attention was the quality of the bottles. They weren't supermarket wines, but labels I'd never seen, dating back to the 1920s and 1930s. I randomly picked one and saw Chateau Petrus 1921 in elegant lettering, and even without knowing much about wine, I knew this wasn't ordinary. There were bottles like Dom Pérignon from 1928, Romane Conti from 1934, plus dozens of other French and Italian labels that belonged in a museum, not an abandoned gas station in the Colorado desert. Over the next 3 days, I photographed each bottle, wrote down every label, and started researching those wines online. What I found left me completely stunned. Some of those bottles were auctioned for sums ranging between $5,000 and $50,000 each. These weren't just expensive wines. They were collector's items, some of the rarest labels in the world, stored in perfect condition for decades. I had essentially stumbled upon a hidden fortune worth more than I'd ever dreamed of having. The most impressive discovery came when I found a leather journal hidden behind the shelves, with detailed notes on each bottle, acquisition dates and prices paid at the time. Apparently, the station's former owner was a serious collector who had invested a fortune in rare wines throughout the 1960s and 70s and had hidden his collection beneath the building. His notes showed he'd spent over $200,000 at the time assembling it, a sum that would translate into millions today given the wine's appreciation and rarity. That's when I began to grasp the true scale of what Eddie had done to me. Not only had he sold me an abandoned station, he'd unknowingly handed me one of the greatest discoveries of my life. The irony was delicious. The man who tried to scam me had delivered exactly what I needed to change my story forever. While Eddie thought he was pulling off a simple con on a naive young man, the universe was orchestrating something much bigger, something that would completely transform my relationship with money, success, and most of all, my family. I called a wine expert in Denver, Mr. Anderson, who came to inspect the site and did a preliminary evaluation. Watching him descend into that cellar, examine bottles with his loupe and professional tools, I saw in his eyes the same disbelief I'd felt days earlier. He muttered words like extraordinary, flawless, and unbelievable as he examined each label. When his initial assessment was done, he looked at me with a seriousness I'll never forget. Mr. Anderson's valuation was even more astounding than my online research suggested. He estimated the collection was worth between $40 million and $60 million depending on auction strategy and private sales. Some bottles were so rare he'd never seen examples in such perfect condition. He explained that with the right approach, this discovery could become a fortune that would change not only my life, but future generations of my family. That night, alone in the station, with the certainty that my life had changed forever, I finally understood that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as the worst betrayals. Eddie had tried to deceive me, my family laughed at my decision, and everyone around me doubted my ability to turn that investment into something meaningful. But fate had other plans, and that hidden fortune buried beneath the earth was the key to finally proving to everyone, especially myself, that I had value and capability far beyond what anyone ever imagined. What I chose to do with this discovery in the coming months would define not only my financial future, but how I would be seen and respected for the rest of my life. With Mr. Anderson's valuation confirming I had a hidden fortune in my hands, it was time to turn that discovery into something concrete and profitable. It was no longer about proving anything to my family or getting revenge on Eddie. It was about executing a smart strategy that would maximize the value of this extraordinary collection. Mr. Anderson introduced me to a network of specialized rare wine auction houses, and together we developed a 6-month selling plan. releasing the most valuable bottles gradually to avoid flooding the market and keep prices high. The first auction took place in Denver and utterly changed my perception of the world of wine collectors. When the auctioneer presented the Chateau Petrus 1921, the room fell silent for a moment, before bids started at $10,000 and quickly climbed to $45,000. I sat in the back, watching impeccably dressed men compete for a bottle I'd discovered by chance beneath an abandoned gas station. It felt surreal, like witnessing my own life transform in real time. Within 4 months, we had sold about 60% of the collection, generating a net income of $25 million that completely altered my financial standing. But the most important gain wasn't the money. It was the confidence I was building with each successful auction, each deal closed, and each compliment from experts praising my ability to preserve and market those historic bottles. For the first time in my life, I was recognized for something I'd achieved on my own merit, without relying on the Brown name or anyone's approval. With the capital secured, I launched phase 2 of my plan, transforming the abandoned station into a site that honored my discovery. I purchased the adjacent land, hired architects specializing in entertainment venues, and began developing what would become the Mountain View Heritage Complex, a tourist destination combining the story of the discovered cellar with restaurants, event spaces, and even a small museum dedicated to American wine culture. It was ambitious, but I had the resources and, more importantly, the vision to make it happen. The universe's justice manifested itself almost poetically when Eddie, the man who tried to trick me, ended up in local news being arrested for fraud in other real estate schemes. Apparently, I hadn't been his only victim, and authorities finally tracked him down after months of investigation. When I saw his face on the front page of the Denver paper, I didn't feel anger or desire for revenge, just a quiet satisfaction that life has a way of balancing the scales. The opening night of the Mountain View Heritage Complex came on a September evening I'll never forget, with over 300 guests including investors, wine experts, journalists, and even some local celebrities who'd heard my story. When I stepped on stage to give the opening speech, I looked out at faces of people there because they respected what I'd built, not because I was a Brown. It was a validation I'd chased my whole life but only found when I stopped trying to impress the wrong people and started focusing on what truly mattered. That night, as I watched guests exploring the complex, tasting wines from the remaining collection, and praising every detail of the project I'd envisioned and carried out, I finally understood I'd found my place in the world. Not as the failure son of the Browns, not as someone trying to prove his worth to a family that never saw my potential, but as Thomas Brown, the man who turned betrayal into opportunity, who found treasure where others saw only wreckage. It was the first time I felt fully accomplished and proud of something I built with my own hands and vision. The success of the Mountain View Heritage Complex exceeded all my expectations, and for the first time in my life, I was building something truly mine, something no one could take from me or diminish. That opening night marked not just the birth of a new enterprise, but the rebirth of Thomas Brown as a man who had discovered his true value and purpose. What I didn't know then was that this success would attract the attention of people I'd left behind, people who would finally see value where they once saw only failure. The success of Mountain View Heritage Complex didn't go unnoticed, especially by my family, who suddenly began showing interest in my projects like never before. 3 weeks after the opening, my father personally called to congratulate me on a smart investment and suggested a meeting to discuss possible synergies between my venture and the Brown family business. It was fascinating how money had completely changed the tone of conversations. The same people who had mocked my decision to buy that gas station now wanted to be part of my success. The first attempt at reconciliation came from my mother, Margaret, who turned up at the complex one Tuesday afternoon with that forced smile I knew so well. She praised every detail of the project, said she was so proud of my entrepreneurial vision, and suggested that maybe it was time to join forces with the family company to expand this concept to other towns. When she finished her rehearsed speech, I looked her in the eye and simply said, "Thanks for visiting, Mom, but I'm not interested in family partnerships." The silence that followed spoke louder than any argument. Kevin was next. He showed up with an offer you can't refuse. The Brown Company would invest capital to expand Mountain View Heritage Complex in exchange for 50% ownership. He mentioned economies of scale, marketing synergies, and all those buzzwords executives toss around when they want to take someone else's work. When he finished his PowerPoint pitch, I answered with the cold clarity I'd learned to use. Kevin, I built this on my own and I'll continue to run it by myself. I don't need the help you didn't offer when I actually needed it. Patricia tried a more emotional approach, talking about family. They'd be stronger together, how proud everyone was of my success. She even shed a few tears, saying she missed her little brother and hoped we could reconnect. But I'd learned to spot genuine tears versus strategic ones, and hers were definitely the latter. I responded politely but firmly. Patricia, we were never close before. Let's not start now just because I have something you want. My sweetest revenge wasn't a scream or public humiliation. It wasn't a scandal. It was simply saying no, with the same calm indifference they'd shown me for years. Each rejected proposal, each ignored attempt at rapprochement, each partnership opportunity dismissed was a small, quiet victory. They taught me that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. Now I was sending that lesson back to them. The most revealing moment came when my father showed up unannounced one Thursday morning. He walked the grounds as if he owned the place, greeted my staff like they'd known him for years, and eventually found me in my office with a proposal he clearly thought I couldn't refuse. The Brown Company wanted to buy Mountain View Heritage Complex for $40 million, keep me on as an executive consultant with a generous salary, and rebrand it under the family name. It was financially appealing, but completely devoid of genuine respect. When he finished, I stood up, walked to the window overlooking the complex I'd built with my own hands, and spoke the words that would define our relationship forever. Dad, you had 31 years to believe in me, to support me, to treat me like part of this family. Now that I've proven my worth on my own, you want to buy my success instead of admitting you were wrong about me. I turned back to him and added, this isn't about money. It's about principles. And my principles are not for sale. From that day forward, I set a clear, definitive policy. No Brown family member would be welcome at Mountain View Heritage Complex as a partner, investor, or advisor. They could visit as customers, pay for services like anyone else, but would never again have privileged access to my life or business. When they called, I didn't answer. When they texted, I didn't respond. When they showed up uninvited, I asked my staff to tell them I was unavailable. It was a clean, final break, necessary for my peace of mind and personal integrity. 2 years after my definitive break from my family, I finally found something I'd been chasing my whole life without realizing it. True inner peace. The Mountain View Heritage Complex became more than a successful business. It became a symbol of authenticity in a region where everything seemed artificial, designed to impress tourists. People came from all over Colorado and neighboring states, not just to taste rare wines or dine in our restaurants, but to hear the story of how an abandoned gas station turned into something extraordinary through determination and honest work. The simple routine I built in that place brought satisfaction I'd never experienced in sleek Denver offices or tense family Sunday meetings. I'd wake with the sunrise, walk the grounds checking each detail, talk with staff about improvements and future projects, and spend my afternoons in the small office I built where the rusty gas pumps once stood. It was real work, with a real purpose, built on solid foundations no one could shake or question. One Thursday morning, while reviewing the complex's monthly reports, I received a letter that changed my perspective on everything that had happened in the last few years. It was from a 25-year-old entrepreneur named Sarah, who had visited a few months earlier and was inspired by my story. She wrote that she decided to buy a small abandoned cafe in her hometown after hearing how I transformed an old gas station into something meaningful. The letter ended, "Your example showed me that sometimes the best opportunities come disguised as failures, and true respect comes from within, not from others." In that moment, sitting in my simple yet functional office, looking out the window at the steady flow of visitors exploring the complex I'd created, I realized I'd found something more valuable than revenge or family validation. I'd found purpose, the ability to inspire others through my example, to show that it's possible to rebuild an entire life from wreckage, and that sometimes the greatest blessings come when we stop trying to impress the wrong people. Sarah wasn't the only one. I received dozens of messages like hers over the months from people who visited and left with a new perspective on their own possibilities. Financial success at Mountain View Heritage Complex exceeded my highest expectations, but what truly made me proud was the reputation we built, founded on authenticity and genuine quality. Food critics from national magazines photographed our historic cellar, journalists wrote articles about our transformational story, and universities even began using our case as an example of resilient entrepreneurship in their business classes. It was recognition based on real merit, not family connections or influential surnames. Sometimes, in the quiet nights after closing, when I walked through the gardens we planted over what was once barren desert, I reflected on how Eddie's betrayal had paradoxically been the greatest gift I'd ever received. If he hadn't tried to scam me, I'd never have bought the gas station, never discovered the hidden wine cellar, never found my true calling. It felt like the universe used someone's dishonesty to deliver exactly what I needed to become who I truly was. The Brown family continued sporadic contact, Christmas cards I never opened, event invites I ignored, birthday messages I deleted. It wasn't anger that made me keep my distance, but a clear understanding that some relationships are toxic by nature. And sometimes the greatest act of self-love is accepting that certain people will never see our true value. They had decades to support me when I needed it, and now that I didn't, their attempts at reconciliation felt hollow and opportunistic. Today, looking back at the entire journey that brought me here, I feel deep gratitude for every obstacle, every humiliation, every moment of doubt that forced me to discover my own strength. Mountain View Heritage Complex is more than a business. It's the physical proof that a man can completely reinvent himself when he stops seeking external approval and builds something based on his own values and vision. And when I receive letters like Sarah's or see a visitor's genuine smile as they learn our story for the first time, I know I've transformed not only my own life, but positively impacted others. That, to me, is the true meaning of success. Life has a peculiar way of teaching us through our most painful experiences. What began as family humiliation became the greatest blessing of my life, teaching me that true value isn't in a last name, but in the courage to build something authentic. The sweetest revenge isn't that which hurts others. It's the freedom to become who we really are. And you, who made it this far, I'm sure you have a powerful story to tell too. Perhaps you faced situations where your family doubted your potential. Share in the comments. What was the moment you decided to prove your worth to yourself? Tell your story, because it could inspire someone else going through the same. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and hit notifications to keep receiving more stories like this. Here you'll find tales of people who turned betrayal into opportunity and built empires from the wreckage. Your journey can start today. Remember, your worth doesn't depend on anyone's approval.